Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I just got a comment on one of my previous videos. I believe it's the video called Why Doctors Hate Us. And I got a comment from someone sort of sharing their experience, and I think they're in the UK, and they were basically telling me, they had a lot of similar experiences to mine, just having doctors that were being dishonest and that just didn't want to treat you, that they would just kind of lie to get out of treating you or taking you on as a patient. And that actually brought me to the subject of today's video, which is some of the worst things that doctors have done. And I did share some of that, some examples of that in that video. For example, I've been yelled at by doctors. I actually am still with one of the doctors that yelled at me. And I know that that's a very common experience for some people that have complicated chronic conditions. Being yelled at by a doctor is almost like your initiation into the world of chronic illness, unfortunately. But I wanted to give more specific examples and kind of tell a story of something that I thought was kind of just awful, that actually two doctors did to me. But I'll start with a few stories. And if you have stories yourself, feel free to share them down below. I know that we often don't have people that we can really talk to about this, or people that can relate to us when it comes to stuff like this. So if you want to share your story below, go ahead. So, I was in my family, we were raised to not to trust doctors, which is kind of ironic given that, I became chronically ill eventually. And I remember my mom would always say, doctors will just lie. They just lie to you so that they can make more money, and they just lie. They'll invent things. They'll invent a diagnosis just so that they can make more money. And I've actually found the exact opposite to be true. Um, I had a neurologist when I was pursuing my second diagnosis. I went to a university that's not too far from me, and when I talked to him and told him my symptoms and told him the medication that had helped me, with those symptoms, I could see that his face lit up. And, I was there to be evaluated for a specific diagnosis because I was pretty sure that I had this autoimmune illness. And I could see from the look on his face that he was pretty confident that I had this autoimmune condition. And, he scheduled me for tests, blood tests and then other types of tests. But when the blood test came back negative, I saw his entire demeanor change. And by the way, just to be, clear, a negative antibody test for this particular condition does not rule it out. About 25% of people with this autoimmune illness don't show antibodies to it. So when it came back negative, I mean, just a complete change in attitude. He was disinterested. I suddenly was waiting hours in the waiting room. I would see them take in other patients that had come in after me. They would take them before me. When they conducted the other tests, it was just like they had very little interest in, it seemed like they weren't even doing the test properly. Like they really didn't care anymore simply because the blood test had come back negative. And if you know anything about, rare diseases or, even a condition like Lyme disease, negative tests don't rule out the condition, but it makes it a lot harder to diagnose and to get treatment from insurance. And so that's something that I have learned in my many years of being sick, is that if you test negative for something, doctors are just, even if they're confident that you have that condition, they will definitely just lose interest because it's going to be a lot harder for them. And they're actually going to have to fight with insurance in order to get you the treatment that you need. I had another doctor that actually, and this is like almost the completely opposite situation. I had another neurologist that actually didn't contact me when I had a very rare antibody come up on a blood test. And I ignored it myself because I didn't know what it was and I didn't think that it mattered. Usually when you have something or when you test positive, your doctors are like, you know, they're right there on the phone with you because you tested positive for something. And so some time passed and I looked at the blood work and I was like, I wonder what that is. And so I found a Facebook group for this rare condition. This also, it's the same autoimmune condition I was just talking about. And I posted what I had tested positive for. And keep in mind that this is, a Facebook group of patients. And because it's a rare condition, there's not a lot of patients in there. The patients that are in there are like fully diagnosed or they know somebody that's been fully diagnosed. I immediately got like 3 or 4 responses telling me that I had to go to an oncologist right away. I needed to get a mammogram. I needed to get my ovaries checked because I had cancer. I knew I didn't have cancer. I was like, if I had cancer, I would, I would be in much worse shape right now. But because so many people were urging me to do this, I went to my primary care doctor and I said, look, this neurologist, because she had referred me to this neurologist, I said, he ran these tests and I came up positive for something and he just hasn't even followed up. And I'm being told that I have cancer. So immediately I had, I think, an ultrasound done and then they got me in to see him again and he scheduled, a mammogram. He said, I'm pretty sure it's a false positive, but we're going to schedule you for a mammogram because it just became this whole entire thing. And I was so angry. I told my primary care, I said, I'm going to report him to the state board because you can't just, when it comes to something like cancer, you can't just overlook that. Even if he knew it was a false positive, you can't just not say anything about it. And she actually talked me off of that ledge. She said, don't contact the board. She probably knew that he would get in really big trouble for it. She said, don't contact the board. He's a really good doctor. He just probably got busy or something. And so I didn't end up reporting him. The funny thing is that now, because of those antibodies, I was told it was a false positive. They ran the blood test again. I came back negative. And the funny part, though, is that even though they told me it's a false positive and I turned up negative the second time, I now have to do like a mammogram every single year because I don't know, they're concerned that the antibodies may show up many years prior to the cancer. It's just this whole weird situation of it's a false positive, but not really, but maybe, but just in case. And again, this is, at the end of the day, it was a doctor being neglectful and being, irresponsible by not being on top of this. And this is actually not even the worst story that I have. But those are 2 stories that are kind of polar opposites, but it just shows you that doctors, they kind of do whatever is in whatever makes their life easier. And if that means just not saying anything or not ordering more tests, that's just what they're going to do. They're busy. They have other patients that, may actually have diagnosed, ongoing cancer, and that just becomes their priority. So this last story, I think this one was probably the one that I found, even though I've been yelled at by doctors, this story was, this is the I think the ugliest, the one that left me feeling the worst out of all these stories, which is kind of ironic because there was no yelling involved. There was no, it was just something that left me feeling very, very unsettled. So as you guys know, I'm on IVIG. I was on IVIG many, many years ago and lost my insurance and had to stop the treatment. And it was actually helping me quite a bit. And when I lost my insurance, I eventually got onto Medicare and I went to a support group. At that time, I was only diagnosed with Lyme disease. I suspected that I had something else going on because the IVIG had helped me in lots of different ways. And so I suspected that I had something else. But I went to a Lyme disease support group, and somebody in the support group referred me to a hematologist. She said, go and talk to this doctor. I forget what his name was, but he was, I think, at Cedars. She said, go and talk to him. He's helped a lot of us. I don't know what she meant by that, but the vibe that I got from that was that this guy was an ally to people in the Lyme community. And that's not very common. You don't find that with a lot of doctors, especially doctors that take insurance. And so I took that as a good sign. I thought this guy is on our side. He's, sympathetic to the struggles of people with Lyme disease, and he may be able to help me. So I went. I scheduled an appointment. I went and saw him. He's a hematologist. He ran some blood work, and he said, I'll follow up with you once I get the results. The blood work that he ran was, I think, to see if I had an autoimmune illness or something. And what the girl in the support group had told me was that I guess if he found evidence of an autoimmune condition, then I could qualify for this medication that I really needed. And this medication is very, very difficult to get. That's something that I've learned over the years of talking to many different doctors regarding this medication. He got the results. It did show some, autoimmune activity, but he just didn't really follow up. I was sent the results. He never called me, never scheduled a follow-up. I had to follow up with him. It became a very vague, like, oh yes, it's showing this, this, and this, and you should probably find a rheumatologist. And that was it. I asked him if he could refer me to someone. He said, I'll let you know, and never followed up. I suddenly saw that loss of interest that I see so much with many doctors, where they didn't find what they were looking for. And I'm not sure what it was that he was looking for, because I was showing signs of an autoimmune condition. And he just was like, go and find a rheumatologist. I never got any referrals from him. So I started Googling within, the Cedars network, and I found this rheumatologist. And this guy is apparently like an amazing rheumatologist. He's treated celebrities. He's, he's just this, this big shot in rheumatology here in Los Angeles. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to schedule an appointment with him. I have the blood work, and the blood work should be able to get me into an appointment with him. And it did. And so I got into the first appointment, because I believe I had 2 appointments with him, and I got into the first appointment. And again, I'm seeing somebody who's concerned. I'm seeing somebody who's interested. And, I told him, I said, I don't know what this means, but I have long suspected that I have an autoimmune illness. And on the blood work is the name of the doctor that ordered that blood work, which was the hematologist. And he looked at it and he goes, I know him, and he refers a lot of his patients to me. Why didn't he refer you to me? Because he asked me how I had found him. And I said, I just found you through a Google search. I was told to find a rheumatologist. I said, but this doctor, he didn't send me any names, so I just had to do it myself. And so he just looked at me like, I don't understand. Like, he usually refers patients to me. So that was my first indication that there was something going on. So, we talked a little bit. He seemed very nice. And then I think he was going to run more tests or something. And then we were going to schedule a follow-up. What happened during that time, that between my first appointment and the second one, was that he got in contact with the hematologist that had ordered the blood work, and they started talking. And I don't know what conversation, what they talked about, but when I went to see this rheumatologist the second time, I pretty much figured it out. So I sat down, he took me into his office. I can't remember if we went to his office first and then he conducted an exam in the exam room, but he sat down and he looked at me. He goes, "So you have Lyme disease?" And I just looked at him like, "What? Like, what are you like? I'm not here for that." And he goes, "So you have Lyme disease?" So essentially, what happened was that the hematologist told him, "Look, she's got Lyme disease. You know, she doesn't have anything else. She has Lyme disease." And rheumatologists often avoid patients with Lyme disease because there could be some contraindications with some of the medication they prescribe, you know, because a lot of it is immune suppressing and that can become very problematic for people with Lyme disease. But I wasn't there, you know, I was there. I honestly believe that I had an autoimmune illness and I was looking for answers because I had been helped by medication that is prescribed sometimes for an autoimmune condition. And so basically it was like this gotcha, like I caught you lying. And he was like, you know, I think that your issues are psychosocial. So he came out with the whole your problems are psychological, that whole spiel. And so he said, you know, your issues are psychosocial. I see that you're here by yourself. You're not accompanied by anybody. You don't leave the house. You know, like he sort of came to these conclusions on his own, which I thought was really bizarre because, you know, how do you know all of this? Like, where are you getting this from? And he's like, you know, I think you just really need to, you know, kind of get out and do things. He says, you're very smart, you're very intelligent. And I think you just really need to get out of the house or, you know, the whole it's all in your head situation. He said, I can give you some medication, which was basically like steroids, which I know are contraindicated if you do have a previous diagnosis of Lyme disease. But, you know, he said, you can take them if you want, or you can just not. So it was almost like he was testing me to see if I would go for it. And, you know, once I saw that, I was like, these two doctors are in communication. You know, I asked, you know, I requested other tests, you know, with other doctors. He ordered the tests, but as soon as I would get to the other doctor, it was the same thing. Like, why do you need that test? You know, how do you have a psychologist? You know, that whole, you know, they were all these doctors that were in the same network were all in communication and they were all sort of conspiring together. And that was the part that really bothered me a lot because I felt so trapped because I knew that it didn't matter who they referred me to. They were all in communication and they were all just going to tell each other, look, she's got Lyme disease, stay away from her. You know, you don't want to deal with this, so just come up with some kind of excuse to get her out of your office. And that was, I mean, not only is that just absolutely vile for any doctor to do, but the fact that several doctors were sort of conspiring together and communicating was just, you know, another level of evil, in my opinion. He also requested to speak to my therapist. This was not the therapist that I currently have, but a therapist I had a few years ago. And I told him, I said, why do you want to talk to her? He's like, you know, I just want to talk to her. And that to me was like, okay, like I don't, it's one thing that you're talking to the other doctors in your medical network. It's another thing that you're going to also get to my therapist and try to convince her that I have these mental health problems. You know, I already have a therapist. I'm already talking to a therapist. What more do you want to tell her? What, you know, do you also want to lead? You know, it's almost like I want to lead the witness. We got to convince a therapist now to let you know that you've got a problem, that you've got a psychological issue. And just to kind of close this video, I did eventually receive a diagnosis for a rare autoimmune illness a few years later. I did eventually end up at UCLA with a neurologist there who actually did listen. And she's a woman, actually. All these other doctors I'm talking about are men. And I'll make another video about that soon. But I did receive an autoimmune diagnosis based on all of the same information that I gave this rheumatologist. You know, I knew in my gut, I said, there's something else. You know, I never believed that I had Lyme disease from day one. And I told myself, I said, I know that there's something else here. even if I did have Lyme disease, there's something else. Having Lyme disease does not rule out the fact that you could have an autoimmune illness. There is even some connection there between Lyme disease and the development of an autoimmune condition somewhere down the line. So, you know, it took me leaving that network of doctors, leaving that little web of doctors, because they were all going to continue to talk to each other and essentially lead the witness, you know, influence each other's opinions. And they treated me like I was the one that was doing something, like I was scheming and lying and trying to catch them, you know. And it's like, no, I honestly believed I had an autoimmune condition based on my response to a medication used for autoimmune conditions. And I did eventually get to that diagnosis. I was like, I know what's wrong with me. Like, this is my body. I know what's going on. But that to me is one of the worst things. I mean, I could get yelled at by a doctor. You know, I've had doctors yell at me because they're frustrated, and I understand that. But the sort of level of just that evil, conspiring, you know, we're going to convince everybody that you're the liar. That to me is just, I mean, doctors should never do that. If you don't want to treat a patient, just say it. If you don't know what you're doing, just say it. Just tell the patient, I can't treat you. I don't know what's wrong with you, and I can't help you. You know, why is it that they have to convince us that we're these bad people? But yeah, that's probably one of the most horrible stories that I have. And it doesn't seem horrible on the surface, but the feeling that it gave me was just so awful. And it just made me feel so desperate and so trapped, just knowing that there are doctors out there that do this. And this guy is like, you know, world renowned or something. He's like one of the big shots in rheumatology. But it's just awful. But anyways, leave your experiences down below. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.